Alright, my first video is going to be on how I build a combat encounter in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You start off by creating kind of a style that you want. Do you want to go with something more horrifying? Do you want something a bit silly? If you want something super heroic, these are the things that you're going to have to think about when you are creating your encounter. For those examples, a horror monster might be something like a a mimic that as soon as you go to grab the chest, horrifyingly it turns into something otherworldly and snatches onto your hand with its slimy teeth. If you want something more comedy, a great example is from Out of the Abyss, where you've got a monster that you could fight, but you can also talk to him. His name is Glabagool, and I'm not sure he has pronouns. But for the sake of this, Glabagool is basically a gelatinous cube with floating eyeballs, and I kind of gave him a funny voice. I'll probably do a video later about funny voices and what kind of accents. For super heroic or more of an anime vibe, you definitely want monsters that are just kind of exaggerated with the kinds of stuff that they do. A perfect villain for either horror or super heroic, depending on how you want to go about it, would be like a mind flayer, where they're almost that exaggerated evil, where it's like, yes, you might even have a mind flayer that twiddles its tentacles like a mustache. I mean, you can think of like Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. So once you've picked your style, it's pretty easy to kind of assume what kind of monsters fit in with that. The next most important thing you want to do is get a terrain that you feel not only fits the monster, but the monster can interact in really fun ways with it. So, for example, if you have a flying monster, you want to have an outdoor encounter. I cannot stress this enough. I've had multiple games with a dragon where that dragon was in a cave and was not able to survive very well because of limited flight. Beyond picking out the boss and the terrain that you want, oh, another great example of terrain, and this is just for you DMs that feel like using a Tarrasque. Uh, for those who are not aware, a Tarrasque is basically D&D's Godzilla. It is also immune to fire damage, which means that you can have a lava encounter with the Tarrasque. Let that one sink in, DMs. It's a lot of fun. What I did with that encounter, just as a little flavor here, is I had that be the second half of the encounter with the Tarrasque, where in the first encounter they were in a cave. Yet again, kind of the opposite of that advice about a flying creature. The Tarrasque can't fly, also doesn't have much range, so you want a cage match. You want somewhere where the players can't run away very easily, they can't fly, and then in the middle of that encounter, I had the Tarrasque burrow into the ground, creating a chasm. Everybody fell through the rubble, and wound up in just this nasty web of lava and just molten rock. It was a lot of fun. So you want to have a terrain that really fits for your monster. Speaking of that terrain, you definitely want to figure out the dynamics of the environment. So, like I said, with the lava, you definitely want to have something that's interactable. D&D as a game is supposed to be something that players can kind of not only imagine what's going on, but say, oh, there's this thing, I'm going to mess with that. You know what I mean? And so the dynamics can include things like regular hazards like lava, acid pools, quicksand, also traps, mechanical or magical. You can have a lot of fun with a glyph of warding that triggers a hold person, and then have the entire area just start to kind of crumble and they are paralyzed and their friends have to drag them down a crumbling hallway. So you, as far as like creating the encounter, not just the picking of the monster or the terrain, you also want to figure out an exciting introduction to the battle. So using that same Tarrasque encounter, what I did, because Tarrasques are supposed to be these subterranean monsters, and I just love the idea of a monster busting out of a wall. So what I did is I had these epic level heroes for a one shot be congratulated for their latest victory on whatever it was. And they were on this big podium and they were getting a speech thrown their way of like, you are amazing and all this blah blah blah. And all of a sudden, boom, out of the wall, a Tarrasque. And the Tarrasque was not only coming out of the wall, but to show its challenge rating, to show how difficult a Tarrasque is, I had him bite half of a purple worm off and then chuck the other half at the party. So, yeah, that really shows an exciting introduction to that fight. You also want a twist that changes the objective of the fight somewhere throughout the encounter. So that twist for the Tarrasque fight would definitely be that halftime crumble of, okay, now we're going into the lava pit, and it's not just fight the Tarrasque and survive, but also avoid the lava. So you're kind of adding an objective or changing an objective with your twist. You can have as many twists as you want, but keep in mind that you kind of want to stay focused with the theme of your encounter. So for the sake of the Tarrasque, and it was a one shot, you don't want to have too many twists. If you're willing to have multiple games for your encounter, so it's not just one game, one fight, it's now one fight over multiple games. If you're willing to do that, you can totally have as many twists as you want. But if you want a smaller scale game, definitely start with just one twist, probably no more than 3. But every time that you make a twist, make sure that something changes with the environment, with the story, with the conditions of the battle, with the objective that's going on. A perfect example of this might be the first situation is that there's an ambush, and now you have to deal with a whole bunch of goblins attacking you, and then, oh wait, now there is a hostage situation. And Lost Mine of Phandelver kind of does this in the very first cave that you go to. So take a couple of notes from Lost Mine. It's fantastic for brand new DMs. The last bit of this, most of that is kind of how I build encounters. The last bit of this is also figuring out the incentives or rewards that you want to give your players, especially if you are not using XP, as I don't. And I can probably go over that in a later video. But supposing you're using milestone XP, where whenever you feel like it, they level up. If players are not leveling up from the end of a fight, they're kind of coming away from that with like, why did we go do that? Why do we care? And unless the players themselves decided to go somewhere and kick some ass and take some names, unless they decided to do that on their own, you definitely want some sort of incentive. So you can have incentives in the form of like a bounty board where it says you get this amount of gold or double if you do this other thing. So that's kind of the incentive up front. The reward can be something that they know about ahead of time, or it can be something that's a surprise. Or it can be kind of just like integrated into the fight. So for example, if you have a boss that is using a powerful wand, that is an obvious reward, but it's currently a problem. So as soon as you get that from the boss, then that takes care of that. Another example is creature venom, so like spiders, wyverns, things like that. Or, you can just go with a standard treasure hoard. So magic items, things of that sort. You definitely want to have some sort of reward from your encounter. And then the last bit here, I don't want to go over 10 minutes for my first video, but the last thing that you want to consider is connecting your encounter to the rest of your campaign. So, like, why did you do this? Why does it make sense? How does it connect to one of a few things? Either the main plot that you're trying to establish with your campaign, like the region. Let's say you're doing like a random encounter. Random encounters can be for crunch reasons, like if you're trying to build up your XP, but they're really great for showcasing the danger that is in this area. If you're underground, a big purple worm creating a massive tunnel right in front of the party and then swallowing somebody up is a great way to show, yeah, you're in the Underdark. You got to be careful about purple worms. But then beyond that, you want to make sure that you set up the next stage of your campaign. It's very much like a transition, right? So you set the scene with your big explosive intro. You have a really fun twist or multiple twists throughout. You're using the hazards or the monsters that go with the boss. I didn't really go over this, but you can pick out minions that make sense. So like kobolds for dragons or goblins for hobgoblin army, things like that. But yeah, so once you get all of that figured out, you want to make sure that the fight feels like it has a reward. It feels like it has a purpose. So you get magic items, or you give gold, or you give some sort of other reward, like maybe a title, maybe land. I love the idea that the players can kind of change the landscape of a map. In my home campaign of Lost Mine of Phandelver, I had them changing the town of Phandelver, or Phandalin, into a city. And they had their choice. Do they want it to be a thieves guild, or do they want it to be like a proper city, like the more metropolitan cities like Baldur's Gate or Waterdeep? And there was some questions there, but they eventually did decide that they wanted to go the noble route. But I think that will be another story for another time. So I hope this is helpful in setting up your own encounters. I will probably make a video about encounter difficulty in the future, but that is very nuanced and deserves its own video. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the first Wordsmiths Workshop, and have a good day.